Hello students, you are welcome in my online teaching classes. I am Shishwal Chauhan and today I have brought for you the fast track summary of the novel The Invisible Man for class 12, and this is chapter 11. Let me go fast with you. In this chapter we find Mr. Cuss and Mr. Bunting in the Invisible Man's room. They were making a search there. Another thing, we come to know that Mr. Jaffers had partially recovered from his injuries and had gone to his home to relax. Mrs. Hall had removed the stranger's garments and the room was almost tidy up by her. Mr. Cuss suddenly found a set of 3 books termed as diary lying at the table which the Invisible Man used to do his work, on which Mr. Cuss suggested to Mr. Bunting as to why they should not learn something from those books. Mr. Bunting, the vicar, the priest, could not make out any sense out of the books as they were written in some old language. In the meantime, the door was opened all of a sudden by a person who seemed to Mr. Bunting like a sailor. That person asked them to tell him where the tap was and water tap was, and they told him to go to the other way. Mr. Cuss also irritably instructed the intruder to close the door. Thus, closing the door, he vanished from there. Actually, he was Mr. Marvel and had come to take the stranger's clothes and books. After that, both of them kept talking together about the happenings in the village Iping. He also remarked that he didn't believe in the invisibility story at all or theory at all. Mr. Cuss called the happening incredible. In this way, both of them reached the conclusion that they shouldn't believe in the theory of invisibility. Mr. Cuss then pointed out to the middle of the page of a book. Mr. Bunting brought his face nearer, apparently finding some difficulty with his glasses. Suddenly he felt something strange at the nape. Nape is the back of his neck, back of one's neck. Then he tried to raise his head, but faced a big pressure on it. It was the grip of a heavy and firm hand on his neck. The hand of the Invisible Man put such a pressure, that was the hand of the Invisible Man, and he put such a pressure on Mr. Bunting's neck that his chin was almost brought to the surface of the table. The Invisible Man uttered, "Don't move, little man." Rather, he must have said it forcefully. "Don't move, little man." Mr. Bunting looked into the face of Mr. Cuss just close to him. Then the voice said, "I am sorry to handle you so roughly," said the voice, "but it's unavoidable." After that, the Invisible Man asked them as to why they had been spying in his private rooms. He also pushed their necks to the table simultaneously, means side by side, and their side by side means together, at one time together, and their teeth rattled as the chins struck at the table. Then he asked for his clothes and also told them that he had fastened the window, means closed the window and locked the doors. He was fairly a strong man and he could easily kill both of them. He wanted them not to do any silly thing in future if he let them go out on that promise. He wanted them not to do any silly thing in future if he let them go out on that promise. As they promised not to do so, the grip on their necks was relaxed. Now Mr. Cuss and Mr. Bunting sat up. He again asked them about his clothes and told them emphatically, means giving some stress on that he needed his clothes, accommodation, and also his 3 books. So the chapter ends up here. Now we move on to chapter 12. The story of this chapter takes us back when Mr. Huckster was following Mr. Marvel. Mr. Marvel was smoking his pipe near a post in the lawn of the Coach and Horses. At the same time, Mr. Teddy Humphrey and Mr. Hall were discussing something about the incidents that took place in Iping in the near past. In the meantime, both of them heard a thudding sound against the door of the parlor from inside. They agreed that something wrong was continuing inside the room. They became cautious and smelt at an unpleasant chemical odor from there. After that, they also heard some suppressed whispers. It continued after some intervals, and at one time there was a sharp cry of, "No, no, you don't." There was a movement again and then silence. There was also the presence of the third person. Mrs. Hall had appeared there, and Mr. Hall made a gesture to her not to speak. But she didn't understand what her husband was conveying to her. Mrs. Hall became impatient of knowing as to what was going inside the room. When she raised her voice, Mr. Hall and Teddy Humphrey had to tiptoe into the bar, feeling bad. Then they tried to make her understand that something wrong was going on inside the invisible man's room. After that, they all 4 listened carefully to the sounds coming from the room. Mrs. Hall also kept watching outside at the huckster's shop that was across the road. He appeared there in some excitement. Crying and pointing in a direction. "Stop thief! Stop thief!" Actually, Huckster was inside his shop, and he had the habit of watching everything that was going on in Coach and Horses, who was coming, who was going in that inn. So he was very curious type of person, and now he was watching somebody taking a bundle and 3 books in his hand, right? And he started crying, "Stop thief, stop thief!" And he also ran in that direction. Then there was commotion. Commotion means movement that came from inside the parlor. There was a sound of windows were being closed. Mr. Hall and Teddy Humphrey heard the sounds of human footsteps rushing outside the parlor into the street. After that, they also saw Mr. Huckster taking a big leap in the air and then falling on the ground. All were astonished, means surprised, to see that Mr. Humphrey stopped for a while. Mr. Hall, along with 2 laborers, kept running. He also saw Mr. Marvel vanishing near the corner of the church. It was concluded that the invisible man had become invisible. It was concluded by all that the invisible man had become visible, but it was Mr. Marvel. They mistook Mr. Marvel for the invisible man. Now chapter 13 begins. As the chapter 13 begins, we find a short and thickly built man wearing a shabby, means dirty silk hat, walking tiredly on the road to Bramblehurst. He had 3 books bound in a string of elastic with him. He also carried a bundle that was wrapped in a blue cloth. That man was Mr. Marvel. It seemed that he was completely tired. Marvel was talking to someone who was not visible. It was also clear from what Marvel spoke that he was unwilling to serve the person with whom he was walking. The voice of the invisible man seemed to threaten him of dire means dreadful consequences if he ever tried to run away from him. Marvel seemed to be frightened, and explained to the invisible person, actually he was Griffin, that he would never do so. Griffin, the invisible man, told him that the secret of his book was utmost importance for him, and he would not let it reveal at any time, at any cost. He also told Marvel that the people must be searching for him, and for that reason they must be more vigilant, means careful, than before. Marvel not seemed to be amused at this. Rather, his face showed clear signs of despair, and his pace of walking slackened, means became slow. The invisible man forced him to move fast and warned him against dropping the books. He also told Marvel that he had to use him as a tool. At this, Marvel told him that he was a miserable and worst kind of tool. He was a man of weak nerves and weak heart. The invisible man told him that he would inspire power in him. We can say that the invisible man was not ready to leave Marvel at all, at any cost, you can say. Then Marvel again started making requests to Marvel for making requests to the invisible man for liberating him from his bondage. The invisible man got irritated and ordered him to remain silent, otherwise he would twist his wrist. Thus, the unhappy figure, keeping his hand on the invisible man's shoulder, passed through the street of the village Bramblehurst. He disappeared into the darkness after some time. Now we move to chapter 14. We come to know from the chapter that Mr. Marvel was very sad because he had to perform his duty given to him by the invisible man. His duty is not only to carry the load of the 3 precious books, but also to work as a money bank of the invisible man who wanders here and there early in the morning to steal money and then fill the pockets of Mr. Marvel, who would be waiting for him by sitting somewhere at a lonely place. At present, he is sitting on a bench by putting the 3 books near him in front of an inn at the outskirts of Port Stowe. After some time, a mariner sits near him on the same bench. He seems to be a man of deep insight. He is reading a newspaper and at the same time watching Mr. Marvel and his books lying beside him. He comes to know very soon that there was a mismatch between the books and the personality of Mr. Marvel. Very soon, the mariner starts speaking about the news about the invisible man and several extraordinary things that happened there. Mr. Marvel doesn't show much interest in the mariner's words, but the mariner keeps on forcing Mr. Marvel to utter something. In the meantime, the mariner hears the chink produced by some coins. He felt as if some coins fell down nearby him. Sometimes during the conversation, Mr. Marvel is tempted to speak more words, and at such a time, when he was about to reveal some vital information about the invisible man, he was at once stopped. The invisible man pinched him, and Marvel uttered, "Oh," as if feeling physical pain. He rose at once from the seat. He made an excuse of toothache. After that, he picked up the books to leave the place. The mariner continued protesting his sudden departure. He went out his anger by uttering some words. After that, we come to know that the mariner also came to know that some fists full of money were seen flying along the wall of some certain places. At last he assembled all the information together and reached the conclusion that he was very much closer to meeting the invisible man. Actually, he was also thinking that Mr. Marvel was the invisible man. Chapter 15 now. The chapter introduces us with a very important character of this novel. His name is Dr. Kemp, and he genuinely deserves to be the hero of this novel because he punishes the villain Griffin, the invisible man, for his illegal, immoral, and antisocial activities. We find him in his study, which was a good looking room with bookshelves full of books. We may find some scientific equipment, instruments, and some scattered bottles there. The time is of the early evening, and there is some light in the room, although he has also lit his solar lamp. The author also gives a small description about Mr. Kemp's physical appearance. He has been described as a person having a thin body structure with blonde hair and mustache almost white. He is very enthusiastic to get the fellowship of the Royal Society, so he is working very hard for it. He is very fond of watching the sunset scene from the window of his room. So at present he is watching the setting sun about the crest means top or peak of the hill. After that, a figure of a man caught his attention. The figure was not clearly visible due to the light of the sun falling from the opposite side. He seemed to be small in height, wearing a hat, and was running fast in one direction. Dr. Kemp stands up from his seat, reaches the window, and stares outside the dusky hillside. The figure seems to him running because of some confounded means confused hurry, and his pockets were full of something very heavy that seemed to stop him from running fast. The running man is now hidden behind the three separate houses, and then he is visible again. Dr. Kemp uttered the word asses and turned around on his heels and came back to his writing table. Now the writer gives further description about the man who is running fast as if he is being chased by some devil. The people who saw him from near distance found deep terror on his perspiring face. He was running, focusing in one direction where lamps were lit, and the people stood in a crowd. He was panting for breath, producing a hoarse and noisy sound. The people were curious to know as to who that man was and why he was in a desperate hurry. After some time, the people also felt that someone was chasing him, and they lost no time to understand that he was being chased by the invisible man. So they ran in confusion, and immediately they bolted their houses to stop the entry of the runner and the chaser. Actually, the runner was Thomas Marvel, and who had given the invisible man a slip and ran from him to save himself. To give a slip means to cheat. He cheated him and ran away from him. So this chapter 15 also ends up here, and this is the total summary from chapter 11 to 15. In this way, I have read this fast track summary for you so that your time is saved, and in a nutshell you can have some view about the novel from chapter 11 to 15. I shall meet you after some time and bring 4 or 5 chapters for you. Till then, have a nice day. Thank you.